You're listening to Rstories, a storytelling podcast that elevates the lived experiences of Chicago's migrant and refugee communities. I'm Chris Shue, and along with my co-host Ali Toro, we'll share candid conversations with the inspiring individuals and advocates at the forefront of key issues affecting these communities, and we'll have plenty of fun along the way. Let's get started.
Welcome to Rstories. I am Ali Toro, along with my co-host Chris Shue. We are hosting Deputy Mayor for Immigrant, Migrant, and Refugee Rights, Miss Beatriz Ponce de León. Welcome to our podcast, Miss Beatriz Ponce de León.
Thank you for having me today. I appreciate it.
Our pleasure is my honor. I know you are a first ever Deputy Mayor for Immigrant, Migrant, and Refugee Rights. And I would love to hear more about it. Why is it first ever? Okay, this position is created by Mayor Johnson, and I know it was a little bit controversial. There are many talks about it, and we are facing a migrant crisis in Chicago. And I, as someone who arrived here as a refugee, I completely understand the challenges you face, and in a very short period, maybe around a year, you overcome so many challenges. It's incredible and amazing. And I would love to say thank you so much for all you have done, and also Mayor Johnson. And let us know more about it. Some details maybe we cannot find on newspapers, or the other outlets. So our story is the first in the time, in our stories for the first time, we want to know more about your challenges, your success, and also discover you.
Well, thank you again for having me here today, and I appreciate the opportunity to tell our story. I'll start just by sharing how this position in our office came to be. So Chicago has never had a deputy mayor for immigrant, migrant, and refugee rights. It is the first time, and we are a city of immigrants. Really, when we look around, we can see our history. Neighborhoods like Pilsen had, 5-6 different churches and within a few blocks, because there was the Polish church, the Irish church. Then later they became Mexican churches. And it's just one way. And obviously we see it in our neighborhoods, in our restaurants, and so many ways that Chicago has seen waves and patterns of new immigrants and refugees coming and helping to make it the city that it is. This mayor, as he was looking to build a focus for the administration, saw the opportunity to really elevate not just the needs, but also the contributions of our immigrant and refugee communities, and to do it in a way that gave more of a public focus, as well as more authority to do this work in support and in partnership with immigrant and refugee communities. So he had the vision, and I always like to say, and the valor to establish this office. Our Office for Immigrant, Migrant, and Refugee Rights is the first time that there is that office in the mayor's office with a deputy mayor role that really puts me in the mix with the cabinet and our senior staff, so that the work that we are doing is always present, as the city, as our leadership comes together to address everything that the city is working on. I think also that having this office at this moment, yes, we are seeing a new wave, new pattern of migration in the asylum seekers that have come to Chicago, crossing through our southern border. But it is also, I think, as our administration, a progressive administration, takes off, it is aligned with the mayor's values. So our focus as the Johnson administration, there are 4 big pillars. One is housing and homelessness. The other is mental health, community safety, and then youth employment, youth development. And if we just think about those 4 areas, supporting asylum seekers, focusing on immigrants, migrants, and refugees is very much aligned with that area, those areas of focus for the city. And for our values as an administration, to uplift our most vulnerable communities. So, over the years, depending on who's the mayor, certain communities have been left behind. And we know that there has been significant disinvestment and racism that has impacted our Black communities. We know that there have been immigrant communities that have also been forgotten. People who have been experiencing homelessness haven't always gotten the resources and the attention. And I think that as a progressive administration, our focus on the most vulnerable will make us a stronger city. So having this lens also for immigrant, migrants, and refugees is a part of that strategy.
You're beautiful. You a couple of times you mentioned values, mayor's values, your values. I believe this is unique. All my background is from political science. Okay, I used to be a political activist in Iran, and we know politicians wants to get reelected. Okay, but bringing values, okay, regardless the consequences, is very unique and invaluable. I really appreciate because I every day I love Chicago because of these values. I see it. Okay, and when it comes from the mayor's office, it makes it really greatest city, not in the U.S. I believe in the world. So, one question I have that I was always honored that I live in Chicago. Chicago is my soulmate, and also Chicago is sanctuary city, or Illinois is a sanctuary state. Now we are welcoming city or state. But when we faced that migrant crisis, I realized we were not ready. Maybe we were just a welcoming city on paper, okay, not from the street. So you touch base a little bit about people before who were in charge, but what was the reason and how you overcome this challenge suddenly in a year? Okay, you did a lot. You did a lot. And I know it's maybe we can talk it conversational. Oh, mayor did that or deputy mayor did that, but hosting this many people in a very short period, it's like it requires the National Guard. Yeah.
Okay, I can share several things that I think have contributed. And first, I want to say that my role and our office is not just about the migrant situation, but in this past year, it has been 90% of our work because out of necessity, right? We needed to provide some strategic leadership and some guidance on operations to be able to have a more directed strategy to manage what we were seeing. I think that the reason Chicago was not prepared is the reason every city was not prepared. This is really a federal responsibility. Having asylum seekers, thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands coming through our border, they're coming, they ask for asylum, CBP allows them to be here temporarily, and then that's it. The federal government does nothing more. So what has happened is that people are going to cities, and cities are now responsible for supporting and resettling, and each city has done it differently. I think it's very evident when you look across, what has happened. This started as a political ploy where the Republican governor of Texas, because they had so many people crossing the Texas border and wanting to move them through Texas as quickly as possible, decided to send people to sanctuary cities, and Chicago was one of them. But having so much power as the governor of Texas to determine where people go really was an unfair situation for our cities. Chicago has seen now almost 50,000 asylum seekers who've come through. New York has over 200,000. And, Denver is somewhere in the 40,000 range as well. But along the way, our federal government hasn't done much to support the operations that it takes, or to grant things like work permits so that as people do resettle, everybody has a work permit if they're granted temporary status here. I think there are things that we could be doing at the federal level. And that is why really our city was not ready, and no city was ready to take this on in such a short period of time with so much intensity. But I think what Chicago has done well is that, rooted in our values, if one of our commitments is to reduce and end homelessness, then we could not allow tens of thousands of asylum seekers to become unhoused and unsheltered and to live on the street. If our commitment is to focus on the most vulnerable communities, then we could not ignore that people were coming here with significant trauma and many needs, and not having a network already in place. So the majority of asylum seekers that come to Chicago are Venezuelan and Colombian. There was not a large Venezuelan or Colombian community in Chicago, the way that we have seen with other communities in the past. And therefore, I think the need for that community integration and support was even greater. What we have experienced since August of 2022, when people started arriving, is an evolving and really deepening partnership with the state and the county. And I think at the heart of our success in being able to welcome over, 45, 46,000, almost 50,000 people in this short period of time has been that we really have generated a solid and working partnership with the state and the county. So we have a joint strategy now. It's not just Chicago's problem. It's really a state and county and city strategy and solution. And that means that all three levels of government have put money on the table to have a shared approach. We've made a shared joint commitment to the number of shelter beds that we want to have available. The state has been the primary funder of the resettlement supports like rental assistance and housing case management. They also have access to some public benefits. And if we had not developed that strong partnership that included state, county, and city, I don't think we would have been able to really succeeded in giving people some emergency shelter, connecting them to resources, and helping them on their journey. And I want to point out the county in particular, their support for public health access, so the community health. They have set up a system where people get health screenings and then have a medical home at county health. And our city Department of Public Health has really stepped up to look at the public health component. So immunizations and urgent, screenings on site at the landing zone. It's really been an evolving but effective operation over time.
So thank you so much for our audience to know more about how important is what the Deputy Mayor have done is refugees from UNHCR. They come through the State Department, US RAP program. Okay, they receive case management services, core services at this from federal government for the first 90 days. Then the refugee resettlement agencies can continue their services. Also, they can receive services from the service providers such as Trellis. But migrant, they don't have that type of support. But the city of Chicago, in very short period, with all these funding issues, grant issues, created type of case management services for migrants who are not eligible to receive any refugee services from resettlement agencies or service providers. So thank you so much. And you mentioned the federal government needs to issue the work permit. So this is a big problem, and Trellis is part of a national campaign. So it's hashtag Let's Asylum Seeker Work. Okay, please follow that hashtag and support that campaign, because it's very sad when anytime when I go shop around, go to Mariano's, Whole Foods. Okay, we see families and standing with their sign, and their little kids are around them. I have a 20-month-old baby, and I prefer to close my eyes than pass. It's very hard to see them. So sorry, I talked too much.
No, I wanna expand a little bit on what you said. I think that roughly in this same period, we've had over 35,000 Ukrainian refugees resettle here. And very smoothly, because they come with full refugee status, they have all the services, they're connected to resettlement organizations, and there was a strong Ukrainian community in the Chicago area. So people haven't even really noticed, right? But at the same time, as these asylum seekers have arrived, because they don't have any of those federal supports and they didn't have a community here to plug into, and because, frankly, they're brown, they stand out differently. And I think people have responded and reacted differently to them. We have been able, again, to build this strong network with the county and the state. And I just want to give credit to the state for the resettlement supports, because they have been the ones funding rental assistance, the wraparound case management supports with our Illinois welcoming centers. Chicago is also a sanctuary state and progressive when it comes to immigrant programs and policies. And we have a network of over 30 nonprofit organizations that are designated to be Illinois welcoming centers to serve immigrants and refugees. That helped us be able to join forces with the state and respond to this situation in ways that other states did not have. So we had this group of organizations that already were plugged in to working specifically with immigrants and refugees. And that was really a big advantage. As we look to the future, though, it is difficult to guarantee the levels of funding that we have had and the ongoing political support, because along the way, we have faced many, many challenges, both politically and financially. And it hasn't been really, like an easy process. So we've had to build an operation that is both compassionate, but also fiscally responsible, and that is accountable to all of our stakeholders and really takes into consideration the diversity of political realities that are there, both for the city as well as the state and the county.
Thank you so much. I know Chris has so many questions. So
You can see it in my face.
yeah.
So many questions. Well, first, again, thank you to you, and I know there's a team of folks that are committed to this. And I think one thing that just speaks volumes about, one, your passion, but two, I think for folks to realize is these aren't really political issues; these are human rights issues, and it's really important that I think one of the things that we see as a social service agency. There's this thing that happens when something becomes politicized, it becomes dehumanized. And so thank you for humanizing the issues and standing in the middle. And I know it can be probably a trying and certainly a difficult political environment. But as folks who do sort of this work day in and day out, just thanks for the work and the commitment. It really helps us to know that we have sort of City Hall sort of moving that same direction and committed to serving. I want to maybe look a little bit deeper into not necessarily the current status of things, but to just learn a little bit more, because what's underneath all of that as you talk and as you hear your background and you see your impact throughout the city and the state and your acts of professional service and personal service is you're passionate about serving the community. And I would love to learn a little bit more about just your background and how you sort of found this as your passion and a cause to sort of dedicate your career and life to. I did want to say, I was really hoping, this is like bad planning on my part, so or maybe my wife's part. We can take it up with her. So I didn't know this until a couple months ago that you're a leap day baby.
Oh, how did you find that out? Yes,
and I had, so my
that's hilarious.
Little over a year-old son, I was like, he's going to be born on a leap day because his due date was like March 3rd. But he was born on February 27th.
That was close.
So I was like, come on, you got to hold it in for 2 more days.
That's funny.
So I was like, I've never met, a leap day of February 29th, birthday.
Yeah,
Right.
yes. I'm 14 years old.
Yeah.
A little weathered.
Yeah. Very, very wise for a 14-year-old. But no, I would just love to learn a little bit more about your personal background and sort of, how you've sort of found Chicago as home and dedicated your sort of career to sort of enriching Chicago as a city.
Yes, thank you for that question. And I want to just go back to something you said at the beginning. I think that it is really important to remember that we are talking about human beings, that migration is a human right, the right to housing is a human right, and we sometimes do forget that because everything is in large numbers and, about budgets and funding. So I have appreciated that so many Chicagoans stood up to help migrants as they were coming here. And there was a moment when we were getting almost 2,000 people a week that we had, folks staying at police stations, and no way could they have stayed there without the support of mutual aid groups, volunteers, individuals, not just from Chicago, but we saw people coming from the suburbs and doing what they could to help. And that to me showed that there, even as contentious as this is, that at the heart, people have a heart and they see that this is a situation, it's a critical situation, and that our own neighbors and friends and family members were able to help out. And I think it is a testimony to what Chicago's about. And I just appreciate that very much. And also the fact that this is definitely an operation that takes thousands of people. In the city of Chicago, we have the Chicago Police Department, the Office of Emergency Management and Communications. We have the Department of Family and Support Services, Chicago Public Schools, the parks, the libraries, our infrastructure. There are so many departments that have been a part of making this work. And sometimes those don't get recognized because it's not evident, but it is really important to note that. Just wanted to share that as well. And then going back to my background, so my parents are from Morelia, Michoacan, Mexico, which is central Mexico, and they came here in the late 1960s. I like to say I was made in Mexico, born in Chicago, and have been fortunate to live kind of a binational life. My family was able to come and go, and we definitely, I'm very rooted in my Mexican background. Spanish was my first language, even though I was born here in Chicago. But so I grew up certainly the daughter of immigrants and very much with an immigrant working class background. I'm the oldest of three sisters, sometimes known to be the bossy older sister. But, that's what our parents do when we're the oldest, especially I think in immigrant families. But I grew up just always seeing my mom and dad helping other people. Mm-hmm. They were here. They were able to figure out how to be here, permanently. They got their visas. They became citizens. They always pointed other people, other newcomers, to different resources. And that just became part of what my family was about. I also saw my mom in particular find ways to earn money for our family. So she sold jewelry and Tupperware and makeup, all these different things. And I see that to this day. I think immigrant people who can't work necessarily or aren't able to because of language barriers or work, permits, they find ways to sell and mm-hmm. to engage and to make some money. And my mom just did that all the time. It was kind of a natural part of what we did. And then my dad was a steel worker. He had a very good union job, very hard job. It was taxing on his body. But I also learned, and I didn't know this growing up, but I saw it later, that, having like a union job made a difference. We had health insurance. He had protections at work. We had vacations because my dad had paid time off. Some of the things that people might take for granted, but I saw the impact that made. So when I went to college, and I was fortunate to go to a very elite university, I was able to go to Yale University. I saw such a wealth disparity. I had never been around so many people that were that wealthy. I didn't realize that I was poor. That's what they thought of me, as someone who was poor. And it really opened my eyes to some social justice issues. Mm-hmm. And I think that was like having my background with my family. And also I grew up Catholic and learned early on about the life of Jesus and what it means to care for others and to be in service of others. So I feel like that mix of my faith, my working class background, exposure to kind of immigrant life, and then seeing that contrasted with the wealth of an Ivy League university put me on a path to think, wait, this is unfair in the world, and how can what can I do to bring back what I'm learning and the resources I have access to make improvements in my own communities, whether it's immigrant communities or working class communities or with people of color. And I've been fortunate that my whole life I have done that kind of work. So I've always been in a nonprofit or government setting, have had the chance to work on coalition building and kind of being a bridge with government agencies and community groups, and have had the chance to go deep on certain areas. Immigrants and immigrant integration is one. Youth development has been, and adolescent rights has been really important to me, as well as education and bilingual and public education in particular. Those are three of the kind of core areas. I think all of that prepared me for this role. So when I was approached about this job, I thought, wow, this is crazy. Why would I do this right now? It's such a challenge at the time. And I had a good position at the Department of Human Services, Illinois Department of Human Services. But I have to say that the idea just kind of landed in my heart and I couldn't say no. Even though my brain was saying no, my heart was saying yes. And I thought, what more, the more I reflected on it, the more I thought all of the things I've done professionally and personally have prepared me for this type of a challenge. And what more of a way to kind of honor even my parents in their struggle and their journey than to do work that could have a lasting impact on immigrants now and in the future. So I jumped in, and that's how I got here.
That's amazing.
Yeah, beautiful. So I have a question. I love academia, and I believe 1,000 times I said that education is our only solution, especially for refugees, immigrant and migrant population in this country. And as a father, I'm setting my baby pathway, to continue her education. This is my mindset. And I know we discussed a little bit before we started recording that you have a different opinion about the education access. I agree with you, because Emma, our previous guest, he arrived here as a refugee, and he said he would love to continue his education, but he doesn't have a chance. So, and I felt maybe my educational pathway in this country is very rare, because I'm doing it. I never realized many people do not have that chance.
Right.
So now my question for you is, you went to Ivy League, so I can assure you, in the whole world, dream is to get into one of the Ivy League university, and back then, not now.
Right.
So Yale University, from immigrant families. Your parents, they were hard workers. And they were doing, not probably, for sure, they were doing their best to make sure you are safe, you have enough food, have a warm house. What led you to Yale University? I'm assuming 100% your parents really wanted to go to Yale.
No, so I we were all three of us. I have two sisters. Turned out to be good students, and not everyone can be, right? But we were good students. My parents, for them, the best education was a Catholic education. That's what they came from in Mexico. And they worked very hard to send us to a Catholic school in our neighborhood. It turned out that we were all very good students. We did our homework. We got good grades. They wanted us to be good students, but it also worked that we were able to meet that expectation. I went to a Catholic high school, and I started getting invitations from different universities to apply. So when you take the ACT or the SAT, I scored very high, and I didn't know what the Ivy League was. I had no idea. It was mysterious. I just knew Harvard, Harvard and Yale. I didn't really understand what that was. But my guidance counselor, we talked about it. And not a lot of girls from my school went to Ivy League school. So that was a little bit rare. I had one teacher, and this is, very true. Like, teachers make a difference oftentimes in ways that they don't even know. But I had one teacher who had gone to Yale, and her family was connected to Yale. And so she she asked me, she said, you should apply. And it kind of opened my eyes, and I thought, oh, maybe I will. And I was able to apply to Yale, also the University of Chicago and Northwestern. And in the end, had those 3 schools to choose from, and was able to visit all of them because they were recruiting and sending us. And then when I got to Yale, I just fell in love with the campus. They did a great job of welcoming us as students, especially as a Latina student. Connecting to that organization there. It was scary to go away, and my parents were nervous about it, but I was very fortunate that they believed strongly in good education, and we made it work. So although it was not, Yale only gives they don't give academic scholarships. It was always based on need. So we still had to pay some money for it, and it was a stretch for my family, but we did it. I value very, very much my Yale experience. As an undergraduate student, I worked in the admissions office. So I would come home to Chicago and recruit students. And I went to schools that were more for, where there were more students of color, where people didn't traditionally go to Ivy League schools, to tell them about Yale and to try to, recruit the top students to apply. And I was very successful in getting Mexican and Latino students. That was my focus from the Chicago area to choose Yale over Harvard or Stanford. It was great. I believe that all of us should have as many of those opportunities as possible. I think over my life, as I've done work around social justice and equity, I realized more and more that these elite opportunities are so limited. So there are very few of us that will get that chance. And even though those of us who do get the chance can use that opportunity for good, what we have to do is improve our public education system. We have to make sure that our public schools, the ones that are the most open and accessible to everyone, are the best that they can be. Because that is where the majority of poor and working class children are. That's where the majority of immigrant students are, of Black and brown kids. So we have to focus on our public schools and not so much on the elite opportunities.
Right. Isn't I believe I'm on the same page with your parents for my child. Because honestly, I don't know. Again, as a refugee, I believe the only solution I can see in front of my pathways or everyday life is education. And I was a case manager for refugees as well for 3 years. Maybe you cannot believe it. Every single new client I receive, the first question, I ask them, hey, what do you want to do in this country, in Chicago? And their very first answer, regardless their age, really, all of them, they wanted to continue their education. Even I had so many clients that were illiterate in their own language, but they wanted to start school in Chicago. And unfortunately, many of people do not have that chance. I can say the luxury now to continue their education.
And Ali, I say this gently, but I'll say this from my perspective and yours. And I think change happens when we care about everyone's access to the opportunity Amelia gets. And I think that's the issue, right? The issue isn't the priority of education. Right. The issue is access to it, right? And I think until I'm Chris, the suburban white guy, and his kids who will all have great public education
and blue eyes,
right, and receive an immense amount of privilege, right? Until the burden for those who don't come from my background and have overwhelming systemic barriers to achievement becomes as important to me as the pursuits, aspirations, and dreams of those which are in my village. I think that's when things start to change. And it's not to say to obviously neglect anything you're responsible for. That's not what I'm saying. But I do think while you can say, yes, that's your focus for your daughter, you also have to realize that's an immense privilege. And so the question is, how are you using that privilege to open the doors of opportunity to those which aren't that are categorically dismissed from it.
Right.
And I use an example from my own family, right? My in-laws are immigrants, and my wife immigrated here when she was in the 3rd grade. But her parents are her mom is still undocumented, and they spent their whole life undocumented. And while my spouse had full scholarships to many schools to go run track, right, Division I prestigious schools, she had to decline all of them because her parents don't know the language, and they would literally have no mechanism to survive if daughter left home, right? And that is the reality of so many immigrant and other households, and not even just immigrants, it's rural households as well, that the farm is dependent on this sort of family structure or the family businesses. And I think that's where, not to minimize the importance of education, absolutely not, but I do think we can't talk about like equity until we have inclusion. And if we've got people categorically dismissed from the conversation, equity isn't a real thing. It's only equity among the privileged.
Yeah. That's actually a good segue to the bigger picture for our office for immigrant, migrant, refugee rights. And specifically, it was named, with the word rights in the title. So it wasn't like immigrant affairs, other cities have that office. Is advocacy, both internally in the mayor's office, in the city, and also externally, nationally and internationally. And it is to promote the advancement of immigrants, migrants, and refugees through policies and programs that move us towards equity, integration, and inclusion. So in this year 2 of our office, our team is shifting strategy in that we are, I feel like the operation around new arrivals is up and running, and it's fairly balanced now, although anything can change. But we are focusing on the bigger picture of how do we continue to make sure that Chicago really does have policies and programs in all of our departments that support immigrants and refugees, including those that are undocumented, so that we make sure that the policies that are in place are being implemented, that they're effective, and that we create new programs and opportunities to broaden access to supports. For example, one area that we've started seeing and people have asked about is supports for entrepreneurs, immigrant entrepreneurs, whether or not they are here, regardless of what their status is. Because you can apply for an ITIN, you can become a contractor and provide a service without having to have a work permit specifically. That's one strategy. So we want to start to look at areas like that where we can, expand access to some resources and create partnerships across city, philanthropy, business, community organizations, so that we're generating new opportunities that over time are going to really make a difference for our immigrant and refugee communities.
Right. So thank you. Let me, for your information, because Chris talked about his family. So he is younger than me 4 years, and he's my boss. And he has 6 kids. And I have only
Triplets,
one.
Yeah. We have a blended family.
Oh, okay. Yeah. That's why you have 6 kids.
Yes.
Wow.
In the previous episodes, we talked a little bit about the culture shock and culture. Other day, I was thinking of my very first culture shock in Chicago. I arrived in Chicago December 10, 2012 at 5:20 p.m. by Turkish Airlines at O'Hare, and I walk out from exit A in Terminal 5. Yeah. Now they switch it. Everyone comes from exit B. But for the first time, two culture shock I faced. It was for the first time when I bought pizza. I put ketchup on it. And it was like I was insulting people. You know how they reacted.
That was offensive.
Wow. Oh. That's ketchup, because in Iran you cannot eat your pizza without ketchup.
Wow.
You have to add ketchup on your pizza. Then the second culture shock, it was, I received link card Okay, then I went out with bunch of, it was Iranian group. Okay, then I was going to use my link card. They, like someone called scram. Okay. So nobody was around me. Then put it back in your pocket. I said, why? Okay, the link card. No, it means okay, you don't have money. You don't have poor. I was really shocked. Maybe kind of for a couple of months, I was really worried to use my link card. So, and stigma and my wife culture shock with me. She's from Chicago. She's American, so it's also culture shock for me. You American do not eat rice with spoon. You use fork. I don't know how. I really don't know how. Okay, and for the first time when I was eating my rice with the spoon, my wife was wow. I was like, wow. Yes, you can use. So
That's funny.
Yeah. So you immigrated here. You were born here.
I was born here.
Okay, but your first language is Spanish. Okay, your parents were from Mexico. What do you remember? What was your first culture shock?
Yeah, I remember being in kindergarten, and I was at a school with my cousin. So we were in the same neighborhood school, and there was a rug with a circle. The children sit around the circle, and then we would do reading or different things. And I very clearly remember that I did not understand because I didn't speak English. And the teacher didn't really know how to talk to us. And it was a very sad feeling. I just remember feeling like an outsider. Yeah. And that's my only memory of kindergarten, is being on the circle and not knowing what was going on and not being able, and being like afraid because I didn't know how to participate.
Yeah, I completely understand your feeling.
That was it. And I think that over time, I appreciate my parents always insisting that we speak Spanish at home because we became bilingual and biliterate, and I studied Spanish in school. So we never lost that language, but it, it just feeling like an outsider because I didn't understand English.
I had that feeling for years. Even I was not sure I can laugh with people here because I didn't feel I belonged to these people here. But by the time Chicago is my first ever home now. Yeah. So in this country. So before we ask you the last question, I know Chris has last question, but I have a question for you. What was your first culture shock with me?
Or with your wife?
Yeah, it's a good question. But he wants to go back home.
I can answer both of those. My first culture shock
with me.
With you. Well, I think there's a couple. I'm going to give you two. And the shock can have a negative connotation. This was actually a culture surprise, like a good thing. Like I was like, and not being well versed in Persian culture, but there's a it's far more physically engaging, like a culture, like to touch somebody, to like when you're talking, to like touch their hand or anything like that. And you do that. And it's not in a weird, uncomfortable way, but it's like, wow, this is a engaging way of how you connect and converse with people. So I've appreciated that. And the other one you already mentioned too, the eating with a spoon is very odd. But you don't just eat the rice with the spoon, you also cut the kebab with the spoon. Yeah. and the whole bit. Polish culture is really, really cool too. I think in terms of shock was actually seeing how the sausage is made. Because my in-laws come from a rural farm, and if you didn't grow it or raise it, you didn't have it. Wow. And so they had pigs and they had crops, and if you didn't have it on your property, you didn't eat it.
So you have homemade sausage at home?
Yeah.
Okay, make sure you bring some for us.
It'll be there on Saturday.
Saturday.
Nice.
So but I think one of the things, I appreciated your point of of your parents having you speak Spanish at home. And it's, you see numerous studies that say the first thing to leave in generations is the language. The first thing that's forgotten. Ironically, the last thing to go is cuisine, but I do think it's one of those things that you cannot really connect to a culture unless you know the language. And I think that is something that we rightly are seeing a priority in education and other places, but my goodness, is it a struggle? Like to find, the educators out there that are bilingual certified and can give native language instruction. So thank you for your work and your advocacy in that area, because it is certainly a need.
Well, I did some work for about 5 years where we ran the Bilingual Education World Language Commission, and then that became an initiative at CPS and ended up really bolstering dual language instruction, which is a particular method for teaching two languages, and also a focus on native language instruction, because a lot of times English is just taught as English as a second language and the native language is allowed to like go away. But what we really need is both. And there's so much evidence that shows that people who are bilingual and biliterate even do better academically than people who just become monolingual, monoliterate, whether it's, their original language or English. I think it's also ironic that there's so much competition to get into our elementary schools that have foreign language, world language programs. The English speakers want their child to learn Spanish or French or Japanese. And yet we were okay with, if you come in with a language like, Spanish or Polish or Vietnamese, you have to let that go and only learn English. That doesn't make sense. Instead, we should be building on people's native original language and then adding English to it, so that ultimately any child in our school system could potentially be bilingual and biliterate. And I'm really proud of that work that we did. I've seen it continue and grow, and it's challenging because you need the staff, you need the funding, but I think it is something that really has contributed to Chicago as kind of a world-class international city, is that we're trying to leverage, those language assets.
So I don't want to talk that much. I know we have to go over time.
Yeah.
So, but I work with some people. They pick on my accent or my English skills. By the time I learn something, I always, I tell every people who English is their second language. First, we don't have an official language in this country.
Right.
Okay. The second thing, when I speak English to people with accent or limited skills, even in one sentence, broken English, this is my favor. And to people who speak English cannot speak my language. So yeah.
Well, and I think really quick on that.
Yeah.
I share this story sometimes, but it took, in our household, it cannot be underappreciated that having a culture for folks who are either recently arriving to connect with is super important. And in our case, the Polish culture in Chicago is huge. Yeah. And in the suburbs, it's huge. Yeah. It's a very rich and storied culture here. To that point that, in my father-in-law came in 1999, it wasn't until 2012 that he went and ordered anything, ever had to speak English to somebody. Because there was just that much of a connection of Polish people. And I think one of the things that we forget, and you're right, that providing access to language supports and in dual language instruction is not a courtesy. It's actually an obligation. And I think that is really where we've sort of mischaracterized things as these aren't luxuries we're trying to build out. It's the right thing to do, and it's the moral thing to do. And
it's the economically positive thing to do, because the more bilingual people you have, the better you are able to provide services, whether it's in a nonprofit or for-profit setting. I mean, so many jobs require people to speak more than one language, and that's a real asset to be able to have.
Well, again, thank you for joining us today. I'd like, if you don't mind, just leave us with an invitation. For us, we work in the nonprofit space, and we've really appreciated the work you're doing, your office is doing, the city is doing. How can we support you, and how can we help be allies and advocates for the work that your office is doing?
Thank you for that question. I think I said this earlier, but Chicagoans have really found ways to connect, to support with this current migration situation. But I think as in general, I would say you could always follow our office, the Chicago Mayor's Office for Immigrant, Migrant, Refugee Rights. We're on LinkedIn and also on Instagram, and we like to share and post information. So please follow us. And then if you have resources, events, activities that you want to share, we will amplify those. I would also say to kind of follow the news around our administration as a whole. There is really exciting work happening around the issue of community safety, of employment for young people, mental health, our work to prevent and end homelessness, and other events and activities that people can plug into, especially those organizations that have a focus on immigrants, migrants, and refugees. And my door is always open. I would be happy to do a follow-up, to reach out. You can reach us through LinkedIn. There may be other opportunities for us to connect. And I would say just one last thing. I think as we all go about doing our work and our daily life, to think about how we can support our new neighbors, whether they arrived in the last 2 years or, tomorrow, or have been here for longer. But as we think about what we individually and as part of our organizations can do just to make life in Chicago a little bit more positive and supportive for anyone who is migrating here from other places.
Thank you so much.
Ali, it's always a pleasure.
Yeah.
Beatriz, thank you so much for your time. And
thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining us. And until next time. Thanks for tuning in to Our Stories and joining the conversation. To learn more about the podcast or get in touch, you can visit us at ourstoriespodcast.com or find us on social media. Our Stories is recorded in Chicago and co-produced by Trellis and Flex Tech AI. We'll see you next time.